There are major problems facing our cities that affect the quality of our life. But which of these challenges have several local cities put on their priority list to solve? Find out on Talking with Henrietta, coming up next. Hi, I'm Henrietta. Welcome to the show. Each one of us can cite one or more problems that we see around us that we would like to see corrected. What's on your list? Is it traffic congestion, a lack of affordable housing, the growing number of homeless in our communities, climate change, the increasing costs of higher education, or is it something else? On this show, I will talk with council members from 2 local cities to discuss what they see as challenges in their cities that are on their list and what they are doing to address the problems. Seated to my left is Menlo Park City Council member Cecilia Taylor, who is currently serving as the pro tem mayor of Menlo Park. On my right is Palo Alto City Council member Eric Filseth, who is serving as the mayor of Palo Alto. And we also have a small studio audience, and I'm delighted that they can join us for this show. So thank you, the 2 of you, for being here. It's a pleasure having you with me.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. Well, when we look in the news or turn on the radio or television, we're beset by the problems that we're facing in our local cities. Do you think that we're in a time when there are more problems than usual, that you remember?
I don't know. I think we have different ones but overall, people live longer. People make more money on average than they used to. We have different problems. I don't know if we have worse ones now.
Worse ones or more?
I think we have different ones. I don't know that we have more than we used to, because we used to have problems too.
What do you think?
Well, I believe that the problems are that social media brings it to us more, and so we get the information more frequently about what's happening in the world. So our children, if they're watching television, they get information sooner now, or if they're using a device to either be on Facebook or Instagram, they get the information more now, and so it's in our face. And so whether it's worse or better or the same, I don't think is really a factor. I think it's more that we get the information faster.
So if it is true, and it does seem to be true, that we're getting the information faster, is that a good thing?
I think that's an excellent point. I mean, it's brought some challenges with it that we're not used to dealing with before. So social media enables greater cultification than we used to have. You know, the news point on social media this week, or at least one of them, is you know, deep fake technology can produce videos that you can't tell were real or not of people saying things they didn't have to. So now you have to question the fundamental, you know, the fundamental reality that we deal with, and I don't think we've ever had to deal with that in the past. So it's a good point. It's
sure,
new stuff. Right?
Yes, whether Speaker Pelosi is really talking at a slowed down speed. Or,
right.
Yes. So does that make it more difficult for you, the 2 of you as public officials, with information that's coming much faster? Does that have anything to do with the demands that might be placed upon you?
Well, one place that we get it is if your constituents have your cell phone number, your email, you're able to be contacted. And so people can instantly talk to you about whatever their issue is or a concern or something that they just experienced, which can be very helpful. I find that if I'm only using those tools to connect with my constituents other than having a face-to-face conversation, that it's best to stay off social media because it can become overwhelming for me.
That's a good point. I think, you know, one of the things that I think we have to grapple with, that I worry about, is that I think one of the byproducts of the social media explosion is that opinions and views that are highly polarized, right, or highly passionate, sort of get amplified by that chain a little more than those that are less so. And there's a lot of discussion in our country and in our region about polarization, right, you know, or politics are heavily polarized. I don't think most of America is as polarized as the polarized part of America, if that makes sense, right? And I think that's true of this area too. And so I think you have to try to sort of say, okay, I hear this, but it's amplified, right? So what's the balance there, right?
So do you face that on a day-to-day basis?
Well, we have a tool in Menlo Park. It's called CCIN, and it's how you can email all of the city council, and it becomes a part of record.
Right.
Now, what does that mean, CCIN?
City council, I don't know
Information, maybe, something like that.
Something like that. And so what happens when people are concerned about something, they'll send an email to all the city council, and it ends up on this log. And so if you're one that monitors it, and some people do, the news media does as well, people will either respond to it or send their own about the same topic, whether or not they support it or their own views. And so we get a lot of that in Menlo Park, and that comes directly to our email. So we're able to see it and read it and stay connected to what people see in Menlo Park is happening and what their concerns are.
Before I ask you the results that come out of that, does Palo Alto have a similar system?
Yeah, I think you can email stuff that goes into the public record. I think one of the things that's good about this area is it makes it very easy for us to communicate the other way. So, you know, we're gonna shut down this intersection for road work, you know, tomorrow at noon for 8 hours or something like that. You know, we can tell people that and communicate that in a way that we didn't have the ability before. People want to see what was the material and the meeting and the minutes and so forth of the council meeting that they were interested in but couldn't go to. It's all on the website. You can search for it and so forth. So there's a lot of good there too.
Yes. Yes, I agree.
Given the fact that you have this two-way communication, the possibility, the opportunities that it provides, what are some of the most the problems that surface the most that people are concerned about?
Well, for Menlo Park, it depends on what's the agenda. And then also depends on, so say for instance, with the 101 overpass construction, people wrote into CCIN because they were concerned about safety. Caltrans didn't put enough signage. Or I believe there were a couple of accidents that occurred as well.
This is at what, 101 and Willow Road?
Yes. So yes, the overpass, which is pretty much, well, I would say pretty much completed. There's still some fencing that needs to go up. But that was a concern. And then recently, it was about the moratorium that myself and Councilmember Nash proposed. And so people would propose, and also development.
Well, most of it was commercial, I think.
Commercial, right? But in my district, it was about all development because we've been overdeveloped, I believe.
Sure. And development, I know, is an issue for Palo Alto, but is this something that a lot of Palo Altans express concern about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if you look at we get a lot of communication, and rightly so. Traffic and transportation, housing, development, some of it, climate change and sustainability, right?
Yes.
A lot of interest in that.
So housing, I know, is a big one. And it's a big one for both cities.
Yes.
So let's see how it manifests itself. In Menlo Park, what's the biggest concern in terms of housing?
As far as citywide, is that we don't have enough affordable housing. For districts, specifically District 1, is that the majority of affordable housing is in District 1. And there are a few proposals to build more housing. The problem with the inclusionary and the BMR is that it's not enough. So
Okay, so when you say District 1, most of the housing is in District 1.
most of the affordable housing is in District 1.
And which is that on the
So that would be
west
considered
side of
the
east side
northern
of-
part of,
of
so
Menlo
Bayside.
Park?
Yes, Bayside
Okay.
of Menlo Park.
And the least is in what, the Bellhaven section of Menlo Park?
The most of the affordable housing is in the Bellhaven neighborhood of Menlo Park.
But that's the low income section of
Yes.
Menlo Park. So that's a good thing, is it? That most of the
It's a good thing. However, it needs to be spread throughout the city. One of the challenges that we have in Bellhaven is that, one, we're a part of the Ravenswood School District, and because of that, people do not generally send their their children to the schools. And so thinking of having affordable housing would make sense to spread it throughout the city, so that gives opportunity to go to other school districts.
So if the residents of Bellhaven who would be assigned to the Ravenswood City School District don't
Yes.
want to send their children to that district,
Yes.
are they able to send their children to other schools
The only
outside of the district?
The only way that they can is if they participate in the voluntary transfer program, and that's if they're chosen. The other option is to pay to go to a
Charters.
private school or get into a charter school.
So is affordable housing an issue for Palo Alto?
Oh, that's a huge issue, right? Affordability is, so in our city, 10% of our teachers live in town, 7% of our city staff live in town. If you're, if you write code for Facebook or Google, you can afford to live in Palo Alto, right? It's all
Where
the
the
other
housing
it's
is like more than $2 million.
Well, so I think a more relevant metric is not what a single-family home costs, but what a condominium or multi-unit costs, and particularly rentals. And so a two-bedroom condo in Palo Alto rents for between $3,500 and $4,000 a month. So if you make $200,000 a year, you can afford that.
Okay,
But-
now hold on a second.
but-
How much is a condominium in Menlo Park?
Well, I don't know in Menlo Park as a whole, but in District 1, the apartments rent between $3,000 and $6,000 a month.
So it's almost comparable.
It's almost comparable,
Yes.
yeah.
And that's
Well,
the
the
low-income
Mid-Peninsula.
section of Menlo Park.
Yes.
Well,
Well, if you want to live 2 blocks from Phil's Coffee on University Avenue, then you're probably going to pay $5,000 for a 2-bedroom apartment, right?
Wow.
But-
so those in Palo Alto can, if you're working for Google or some of the high-tech companies,
Right.
that you could probably afford it, although a lot of tech workers, too, are kind of doubling up.
Yeah, I think, well, you know, if you want to buy a condominium in Palo Alto somewhere, 2-bedroom condo probably costs $1.5 million, right? And so on 2 incomes of $150,000 each, 2 white-collar incomes of $150,000 each, that's about 5 times your gross income, which is kind of about the outer limits of what people can afford if they make a lot of trade-offs and so forth. So it's a challenge. I mean, but if you got a household income of, well, over $200,000 a year, which a quarter of the Silicon Valley does, right? You know, your options are different than if you're a starting teacher in the Palo Alto School District, and which pays $67,000 a year for an entry-level teacher, right? And that's more than other districts too. You have a vastly different set of choices in front of you.
So we just now talked about some of the options that those in Palo Alto have, because many have a higher income. But since Bellhaven is a low-income community in Menlo Park, and the housing is comparable, who's renting?
That's a good question.
Are tech workers renting in Bellhaven?
That would be the assumption. I'm under the impression that the new units that have been built recently are less than 50% occupied because people can't afford it. And the people who need to be able to live there they end up getting priced out, and so they're displaced.
People who live there traditionally, are they priced out?
Yes.
They're not single-family homeowners.
Well, now, no. Our demographics have changed. My guesstimate is that in the past 10 years, we've probably lost about 40%.
Why?
My assumption is people decide to relocate. People lose their property. We had some issues with predatory and discriminatory lending.
Foreclosures.
Foreclosures. But we had a lot of change, and then you had investors come in and buy up a lot of those properties and then offer that former homeowner to become a renter of that property. So some families have an option to stay, but eventually they're priced out because we take advantage of the market.
So when you consider the high cost of living in both cities and the lack of affordable housing, that's a major problem.
Yes.
We can agree on that.
Yes.
So what are you doing about it?
Well, below market housing can't be built without subsidies. So City of Palo Alto spent $28 million in the last 3-4 years on affordable housing. We spent 15 on the Buena Vista project. We spent 10 on the Wilton Court project. We've got $3 million earmarked for Joe Simidian's teacher housing project on Grant Avenue. It isn't enough. It's going to take a lot of money. Right? And adding market rate housing doesn't address that because it just gets sucked up because there's so much demand by the high end of the market. So there's really I think there's really two markets here. There's one which is the market tech-driven economy, and then there's everybody else that has to live there. Because you can't have a community of just software engineers and patent attorneys.
No, you can't. But the one thing in terms of Palo Alto is the reluctance to have high-density housing.
Well, we've zoned for higher density housing along transit corridors. We have done that. So we eliminated unit densities, for example, along the El Camino corridor. We've upzoned FARs. We've reduced parking carefully. In some of those, we've streamlined the approval process. But as long as the region continues to produce high-wage jobs vastly faster than it produces housing, we're never going to get out from under this problem. So, for example, there's a project in the city of Santa Clara, which is supposed to break ground sometime in the next couple of weeks. 6.25 million square feet of, 6.5 million square feet of commercial space, 1,680 housing units, which is good, except it's going to produce 25,000 new jobs. Okay, and so that means you're going to have 22,000 new people with no place to live, looking for some place to live. And either they're going to live in Morgan Hill and commute, or they're going to displace people who live closer, and those people are going to live in Morgan Hill and commute. Right? So until we balance those things, we're not going to get out from under this problem. So any strategy that's going to have a realistic chance of succeeding has to tie job creation to housing creation.
Now, in Menlo Park, you have written a letter asking for a moratorium.
Yes.
What type of moratorium? On housing?
On all development.
Which is mostly development.
In District 1, we have taken most of the development in our area. We've had extreme impacts, and we haven't had mitigations. And so,
Extreme impacts like what?
traffic, continuous construction. There was a part of the development agreement with Facebook. There was a traffic calming study that was done that's supposed to be implemented. Well, it hasn't happened yet. And so when you're negotiating with developers, you need to make sure that you prioritize the needs of the community first. I believe because we upzoned our area through the Connect Menlo process, and because we only upzoned one area of the city, it should have been a specific plan. So because a specific plan would have done something around having a community plan to make sure that health and safety wasn't an issue, which it is. We don't have any air quality testing in the community. We are still doing
No environmental studies.
well,
That's not required.
They do environmental studies.
Wouldn't that be a part of air quality testing?
You would think it would be a part of it. But at this moment in time, we don't have air quality testing.
Now, you mentioned something about Connect.
Connect Menlo.
Yes.
Connect Menlo was the process that Menlo Park used to engage the city to do a general plan update. And this was done, and it was a 2-year process from, I believe, 2014 to 2016. At that time, the Menlo Park City Council adopted it in November of 2016, then amended it, I believe, in 2017 to upzone it again to add, I think, 3 other zonings, life science being one of them. But essentially, our whole community, the surrounding community as well, was upzoned.
Which means?
Which means that we changed the land use. So it was changed from light industrial to housing, to life science, well, no, life sciences was still that, to mixed use.
So what would life sciences be?
So that would be your biotech companies. And so that's the most of what you see that's along O'Brien Street and going towards Adam Court near Job Train.
Sure. So if you ask for a moratorium on all development,
Yes.
how long is the moratorium supposed to last, and what would make the moratorium end?
Well, the moratorium can last up to 2 years. And it's to be determined by the council, the findings. You'd have to determine why you'd want the moratorium, and then within the moratorium, decide what you want to do while the moratorium lasts. And so because we couldn't get a consensus on that is the reason why it was rejected. However, the fact is, we need to look at how we've upzoned a community and why hasn't there been any reinvestment in that community. We've had a lot of revenue increase in Menlo Park, specifically in District 1, and we contribute to the revenue as just like any other area of the city, but yet we still look like we're still in a different part, we're in a different city. We've been a part of Menlo Park for over 70 years, and you can't tell. We're in different districts, school districts. We don't have the same reinvestment. Our community center doesn't have the same services for the community. We're open 40 hours, and the other community center is open over 100 hours. So the disparity is huge. And so for me, if you're going to continue to develop my community, there has to be reinvestment. And if you're not going to reinvest, then don't develop over here anymore. And I included housing in that because the number of housing units being provided that are affordable are not comparable for the impacts. Having less than 50 units affordable out of 735. And then who's getting the units is another thing. We share in with East Palo Alto with some of our units.
Yes, exactly.
And so
are there any
inclusion rates, they aren't enough, right? You know.
And when you talk about inclusion rates, you're talking about?
If I build 100 apartments, then some percentage is supposed to be dedicated to low income, right? Typical inclusion rates in this area are 15 or 20% or something like that.
Yes.
But it's the wrong ratio. You need more like 50%.
Right.
So what will bring that about?
Well, you actually see some interesting stuff going on in this area in some cities. So if you look at what Stanford is trying to, if you look at what the County of Santa Clara has made a condition of approval for the Stanford expansion, they've made it a condition that it basically fully house, right? So that all the new jobs, they produce enough housing to support all the new jobs, right?
How can you do that?
That's somewhat controversial. Well, you make it an approval condition. You say you need this much housing, or it's not going to go.
So you're saying that to developers, that we're not going to allow your commercial development,
exactly,
unless you also build.
Exactly.
But that is reasonable as far as the communities are concerned, right?
Right.
But is that a reasonable request to make of the developers? That assumes they have an unlimited pot for development, does it?
But the issue is, somebody's got to pay for it. I mean, the macro problem here is the valley. I mean, this is a problem of success. So first of all, you go anywhere else in the country and you say, we got a problem with, our job growth has outpaced our ability to house it and so forth. So we're looking at this, and they look at you like you are from Mars. Okay, this is a problem this is a special kind of problem. Okay, but the problem is that the valley has generated immense wealth and hasn't invested enough of it in the housing and transportation infrastructure that it takes to support that commercial expansion.
Why
You know,
not?
Well, for Menlo Park, it wasn't required. We had a circulation element as a part of our general plan update.
And what's the circulation
So
element?
that's how mobility, how we get around the city, whether you drive, walk, or ride a bike. And the fact is, we needed to do the circulation element first and implement some type of infrastructure plan before we did the development.
So why does...
let me try that one a second, though. But
Okay.
But to be a little bit charitable here, right? It's really only 10 years since the recession. We had this terrible recession, and it actually is not that long since then. And so the first several years coming out of the recession, you know, people were out of work. You know, people couldn't make their people couldn't put, you know,
What was that about?
put their food on the table and so forth.
Was it that bad here in the Valley?
I think for a lot of people it was.
And we're talking about, what, 2008?
2008 to 2010. So I think for the first few years, we just didn't know this. I mean, it's always been expensive here, right? And I think it's only in the later years that I think, you know, this is, wait a second, this problem is getting worse, it's not going away. And I think us as cities probably were too slow to respond to it.
Well, I can
Right.
remember during that time, there was a lot of commercial space, too much commercial space that was sitting empty.
Yeah.
So could the emphasis then have been on filling up that commercial space?
Well, I think it was. I think if you look at the years from 2010 to 2014, right, there was massive job growth in the Valley and very little new commercial construction, okay? And basically the new jobs went into the vacant commercial space.
And at that time,
But
too,
after
just
that,
before that time, Palo Alto didn't want any, necessarily wasn't encouraging commercial development.
oh, Palo Alto approved a lot of commercial development. The whole,
But
so-
it wasn't necessarily a priority because they wanted to maintain that,
there was a-
that
no,
feeling of
there was
Palo Alto.
There's a lot of commercial space. I
Even
mean,
then,
well, in the
in the
years
90s,
of
late
2000
90s,
in the,
early
in the 2000 to
2000s.
2010, yeah, there was a big commercial building spurt in Palo Alto. I mean, that's where all the residential parking problems came from, was massive commercial development downtown that didn't have enough parking for its tenants, right? And so there were parking wars in Palo Alto over this and so forth. No, but since 2014, 2015, the Valley's been on a huge tear of commercial growth because they had to make space for the job creation.
You were going to say?
So well, at that time, it was the Bellhaven neighborhood along with the area where Sun Microsystem was. And there's always been an issue around traffic. Traffic has been forced on Willow Road for decades. And so traffic, transportation, air quality has been an issue for a while. And so just looking at that small area that was upzoned, it made sense to look at an infrastructure plan to handle the load of the traffic.
Now, is that where Facebook is currently located?
Yes.
And if that was always a problem, weren't there any requirements requested of Facebook for making sure that its operations did not increase those problems?
Well, at that time, I was not involved. However, from what I read in the development agreements, there was a certain amount of money, somewhere around $3.5 million that was put aside for transportation. But that money is just to look at, well, this is the problem and let's look at some potential solutions, but it's not going to fund it.
Okay. Now, one thing that's been very controversial, and
I should do another example, by the way. The Mountain View North Bayshore project is my favorite example of this, which is Mountain View City Council negotiated primarily with Google, but with a couple other tenants, the precise plan for the North Bayshore area. It's going to add 10,000 housing units and 15,000 jobs, so it's fully housed. And it took a lot of work between the tenants and the city, but they negotiated a fully housed project. And so the result is they're going to have a lot of good jobs, they're going to have enough housing for everybody, they're going to have some transportation funding to go with it.
Okay.
It's doable. It's
No,
hard, but
no,
it's doable.
Now, you had mentioned that there is new development slated, residential development along transit corridors.
Well, we have upzoned, right?
Okay, no.
We don't, I mean, that's the asymmetry here is cities don't build housing, but we do permit commercial expansion. So that we can modulate.
Okay. There is something very controversial, a piece of legislation by Assemblymember Scott Wiener.
Yes.
SB 50. And it seems to be in line with this idea of building housing along transit corridors. So what's the opposition?
I didn't have any opposition. My challenge with SB 50 is that it didn't deal with affordable housing enough. If you're going to put legislation together, it really needs to focus on why people can't find housing, which we know they can't afford it. So how do you make it affordable? And from my understanding, SB 50, it didn't guarantee 50% or even 100% affordable housing. It just guaranteed housing around transportation. And for me, we don't have a large transportation infrastructure in District 1. And so SB 50, if I understood it correctly, it wouldn't have applied to our area. And we're already upzoned.
Unless you're jobs rich.
We're jobs rich, but we don't have a transportation infrastructure. And you can keep adding 15,000 people over there. They still can't get around. So we wind up trapped trying to fulfill a need when we don't have enough space in our roads. We don't have a lot of roads.
Sure.
The neighborhood doesn't have access.
So I think there's 3 problems with SB 50. And one is the one you mentioned, right, which is does nothing for affordability. So our problem in Palo Alto, we don't have a problem attracting high earners to Palo Alto, okay? We have a problem keeping low and mid-wage earners, right? So SB 50 doesn't do anything for that. The second one has to do with, you know, that's the elevator pitch, high-density housing near transit. But if you actually look at the bill, there's a lot of stuff in there that isn't related to that. It says near transit or jobs rich, right? Or you have a good school district and stuff like that. Well, all of Silicon Valley is jobs rich. Okay. Very little of it is actually near transit.
Now, all of Silicon Valley is not jobs rich.
Well,
It's
a lot
like
of
Belhaven.
True.
Isn't.
A lot of Silicon
East
Valley.
Palo Alto
a lot
isn't.
Of
So
lot
it's those low-income areas that
True.
could really use the jobs and use the housing.
So we agree. So Palo Alto has twisted I mean, it's a tangent. Palo Alto has twisted the zoning knob to try to stimulate more housing. We've also twisted the commercial growth knobs to try to close that down, right? So Palo Alto has put in office caps designed to limit job growth. So I think it makes perfect sense that if East Palo Alto and Belhaven need jobs, that's where the regional need is, okay?
Too
or
bad you
Dearden
can't
Station.
share. Yes.
Well, what I was hoping...
So the third problem with SB 50, and maybe the most basic one, I mean, it's problematic on parking. That's a big problem too, and they're in denial on the realities of what parking means in cities. But the question is, if the provisions in SB 50 and some of these other bills, if they make sense, why wouldn't local voters do them by themselves? And there really aren't good answers to that question.
Well, I would think they would make sense, but not every city would consider it in its best interest.
That's right. You have to go down the path of, voters are,
they want to keep things as they are.
Yeah, right. I don't think that's entirely a
We
fair
might be
picture.
able to get back to it, Cecilia. I'm sorry.
We all see
okay.
we all see the problem, right?
Right.
Well,
what I was going to say earlier is that just looking at District 1 in Menlo Park and the number of jobs that we have there can be anywhere. The low could be around 25,000. The high could be 32,000. There isn't a hiring policy, as East Palo Alto has, to say you have to hire X percent of the community members.
Can't you put that in?
We can.
Okay.
This is why I'm in office, to start doing progressive things, because we should be hired so we could walk.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We have the power to condition commercial expansions, and there is a lot of money in commercial expansions. I mean, the Silicon Valley 150 has a market cap of over $4.5 trillion. I mean, that's a lot of coin.
We have the power to have some more input, and we have
Our audience.
Yes, we have an audience sitting out there who've been listening that might have some questions or some comments. All quiet on which front?
Want me to, is this thing on?
Yes, it is.
You can't even hear
and
yourself.
you are.
I am Court Skinner. I'm a Public Works and Transportation Commissioner in East Palo Alto. And I've lived here for 31 years now and been involved for at least the last 20, one way or another. One of the things that occurred to me as I started looking into this whole thing, and I'm fascinated with this dialogue that's going on, is that, you know, if I were the CEO of General Motors and had made as big a mistake as we appear to have made in the jobs housing balance, in predicting how many Ford trucks or Chevy trucks and Cadillacs I was going to sell, I'd probably get fired. And yet, there seems to be really no consequence.
Well, the people who made those decisions aren't in office for the most part. They termed out.
Yeah, Cecilia's the new CEO.
Oh, I'm actually, I'm thinking more of the of not the elected city council members. I'm thinking of people like city managers who should have been warning of this. And my impression is that the competence of city management somehow doesn't measure up to the competence
Well,
of
the city council
management.
has to approve the recommendations of the city
need some
managers,
good
don't they?
Yeah.
So it seems to be a shared responsibility, would you say?
I would say.
I think-
I mean, my understanding is that the residents elect the city council hires the city manager, and the city manager manages the staff. But that isn't what a lot of cities see,
Right.
which is a challenge. I just thinking about Menlo Park and our organizational, our organization. I believe we need to go in and look to see how efficient it runs. We need to look at best practices, transparency, and accountability and inclusion. There's more things that can be done to make sure that we have best practices in our city.
You know, this is a more complicated problem than I think most people realize. This is a very, very complicated problem with a lot of moving parts. Otherwise, we would have fixed it by now, right? I recommend, if you've read this or you haven't read this, a really good book on this topic is called Pictures of a Gone City by a UC Berkeley geographer named Richard Walker.
Yes.
And have you read that?
I have the book.
Yeah,
And I've heard him speak.
His analysis is spot on. You may or may not agree with his politics, but his research and analysis is bracing, right? And really helpful to understand this kind of stuff. So I would recommend it to anybody.
So what major point does he make that you think is right on?
He makes many of them, and it's a huge sweeping subject, but I'll pick out one,
Okay.
right, which is that you know, this is fundamentally a problem generated by demand, right, as opposed to a lack of supply, right? And so you're not going to be able to fix it. You're not going to be able to fix it unless you're not going to be able to fix it unless you work on both.
It's a problem generated by demand and not, what was that again?
It's
Without,
primarily generated by massive, unprecedented and massive increases in demand, as opposed to, you know, downzoning, for example, right? And that it's been brewing over many, many years.
but there are also massive increases in demands for supply, which
That's right.
aren't realized.
That's right. That's correct. If you look at housing production in the Santa Clara County, it's been roughly flat for 40 years. It's between 5,000 and 10,000 units a year for 40 years. A little more in good times, a little more in bad times, and so forth. So that's been the constant. But the demand has exploded.
Yes, but could some of that be too, because all of these communities, the people who got here and settled, liked it so much the way it is or was that they didn't want anybody to come in. And they have ordinances about how high up you can build. How high can you build in Palo Alto?
You can build 50 feet in Palo Alto.
50 feet.
50 feet. 50 feet.
Which is what, four stories?
4 or 5 stories. Yes. We
But
have
no more than that.
Right.
Now, I mean, you can't build a skyscraper like in New York. That would really,
That's true. You cannot build a skyscraper.
you can't do that. So, I mean, there have been limitations in terms of residential housing.
Should we do that?
So I saw somebody shaking their head. Rita.
Rita Burroughs of Palo Alto. So I don't think residents do not want other people to come in. I think what residents want is they want to maintain the quality of life that exists in the area. And if additional people can come in and have that, then that is fine. And I don't think that is eliminating or keeping people out. I think what it's asking for is let's not have a blanket plan that really doesn't fit anybody and will end up ruining our cities for developer profit. My understanding is that in SB 50, several of the problems are there is no parking requirement. So where are all the cars going to go that belong to the people who live in these high rises near our our transit corridor?
Hopefully they would take public transit.
We don't really have public transit. We have Santa Clara Valley Transit, VTA, that is reducing bus lines. We have...
Yes, because people aren't using them.
Well, they're not using them because they take hours to get somewhere. I mean, I challenge every elected official
That was our meeting
in
this
this
morning.
area to take the bus line
Well,
somewhere.
you know, if more people were to use them, those buses, there would be more demands for them to run more efficiently.
It's the chicken and the egg, Henrietta.
I think a part of it, if you don't
Right.
mind me responding, is that, well, and I said this earlier, is that a lot of the people making decisions around public transportation aren't using the bus. If you go to VTA or Samtrans, ask them how many of their employees use the bus. And so we have an outdated system. When I look at the buses, there's less than 12 people on them. Why? Because it takes an hour and a half to go 4 miles. So why would you ride it? You can Uber, Lyft, walk, ride your bike, or God forbid, drive your car. So we have to look at, we have to look at our officials, and there isn't an elected body on the on public transportation. It's more of who they hire to run it and get on the boards. I think there was someone there earlier that said they were on a board for Samtrans or for VTA.
Kinetics, yeah.
So, you know, it's disrupting the pattern of how we have normally operated.
Well,
Right, but I
I thought
don't-
one of the things we saw this morning was really telling, which is Google runs 260 different their own bus lines. They all terminate in Mountain View and Sunnyvale at Google, so they go to 260 different places around the region, right? And if there were convenient public if everybody that worked at Google lived next to Caltrain, they wouldn't have to do that, right? The problem is that we don't have the transportation infrastructure to support that, and that's why they have 260 different bus lines.
But those 200 and some buses, do you know how many people they're transporting who are not on the roads in their cars?
Right.
Yeah,
And if the cities could
absolutely,
set up
absolutely.
some system, could set up systems of buses like that, wouldn't that really solve the transportation problem considerably?
Buses or shuttles.
Buses or
Yes,
shuttles,
so
yeah.
why
Either
can't that
one.
be done?
It can be done.
So who can put that into?
You have to pay for it.
Yes, but at the same time, I'm sure people would be willing to pay to get out of their cars if it were a reasonable price. Now, BART is losing ridership because they're increasing their prices.
Right. Well, didn't we pass a transportation measure, Measure W? We can use money from Measure W to build a robust citywide shuttle system.
We have a comment.
I'm Renee Wood. I'm from the Berkshires in Massachusetts. I grew up out here in California, and I visit every so often. And we were talking about this today, and part of the problem is the last mile or the last 2 miles, both getting to public transportation. We won't even talk about the bus because nobody in their right mind who has another choice is going to use a bus because of the time that was just discussed. But we were kind of talking about what would happen when a new development went in, if, or even the city, using city land, put in a 10 or 12 story underneath, so you have the land on top for a building, parking garage. And in addition, you started using some of the measures that are being looked at in Manhattan, have been implemented in London. So if you're going to drive in the city or drive in the town, you are going to pay.
Congestion
But if
pricing,
you were to park your car at no charge. And there was a series of buses that actually ran every 10 minutes or so and took you to the major places. That doesn't seem like that outrageous of an idea, because part of the problem is the congestion that's coming with all of the development. No parking requirements and then no congestion. And it's not being looked at as a cumulative problem. So as Mayor Eric said, 10 years later, it's a huge problem, and the next person in the door shouldn't necessarily have to pay to solve it. The other thing, I think, in any bill like SB 50, we've tried this in Massachusetts, it's really important to look at what's in it for the developers. These bills are usually heavily weighted toward the developers, and it takes time to plow through the legislation, but it's important to find out who's benefiting. I, this time around, have been shocked to see people in RVs and trailers parked in a city where you cannot buy a home for under 1.5, 2 million. It's really almost like this is becoming a third world country for some of the people who actually provide the fundamental services. I mean, this town, everyone should be ashamed that there are people who are living in RVs. And actually, I believe in Menlo Park is going to have a plan by the end of this December or next March that they're going to make RV parking on streets illegal, if I read the Palo Alto paper today. So it's a huge problem. Excuse me, Mountain View.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you
I
for
apologize.
your input. So we'll let you respond. I think you had a response, perhaps to Rita's, one of her earlier comments.
Which one? Oh, the parking? Yeah, if you don't...
Oh, you know, you said it's not that you mind, residents mind having more people come in. You want to still maintain that quality of life. And so that almost puts up barriers for people to come in. It's like, how do you maintain that quality of life and still be open for a larger population?
You have to do it through careful planning, thoughtful process. You don't do it by building houses on parkland. You build it. You do it on building housing on the governmental center over on California Avenue, where teacher housing is going to go, or you do it by limiting the luxury units in downtown that can only be afforded by a very, very, very minor part of the population.
So is there sufficient land?
I had a comment on that one, a little bit too, on what Rita said too.
I thought so.
Right, which is, you know, at some level, yeah, people do care about traffic, they care about congestion, they care about parking and so forth. And so I think people everywhere care a little bit about those things, right? One of the things, and I don't know if this is true in other towns, but has certainly become part of the zeitgeist in our town, is that there is a lot of sentiment that if you're talking about affordable housing, we should be more flexible on some of those kinds of things. If you're talking about market rate housing, which in a lot of people in our town minds basically translates to propping up Apple profits, okay? A lot of feeling differently about that. So if you're talking about housing people that otherwise wouldn't be in the community, that we want to be in the community, I think there's a lot of interest in figuring out how to do that better. Apple engineers, Apple earns $1.9 million per year per engineer or something like that, or per employee, right? So I think
if they're full-time or part-time, there is a difference.
Full-time, yeah. Well, but now you're talking about people, if you're talking about part-time, you're talking about people only making $60,000 a year.
Yes, a lot of the tech workers.
That's right, now you're in the other group, okay?
Yes.
Right.
So isn't that interesting, these part-time people making $60,000 a year, who any place outside of Silicon Valley or outside of Northern California would do quite well, perhaps. And so it just
Yeah.
amazes me as
Amazing,
we
isn't it?
as we talk about this. Here we are in the heart of Silicon Valley and innovation, and we can't seem to come up with solutions right now
Well, I think we're
for housing.
I think we're
We're putting regulations.
we're starting to go the right direction. Actually, I think you're seeing some of this kind of stuff. So first of all, you have to buy the argument that you'll never fix the problem as long as you're adding jobs many times faster than you're adding housing, right? But you are seeing movements in cities to try to connect those things. I'm a person that believes that if you want to fix a thorny problem that's going to take a long time, what you need are processes to put in place that are going to direct you towards that outcome.
Now,
So balancing jobs and housing growth makes a lot of sense to me.
We're talking about long-term processes.
Yep.
So what can be done in the short term? What can be done other than regulations against RV dwellers in a city to accommodate those people who can't find housing and need to live in their RVs?
Well, you're seeing programs crop up around. East Palo Alto has done one, Mountain View's done one, Palo Alto's talking about it.
And Menlo Park?
Menlo Park has
analyzing
no
one, so-
parking on the street
Yes.
at all. And as far as, for me, I look at it a little differently, because instead of providing a place to park, how about providing a place to live? And so for me, I look at the project that Facebook did with workforce housing for teachers. They subsidized 22 units. It was about $2.5 million, and they committed to 5 years. So I believe that people are worth, I'd say we can take $250 million.
That's great for the long term. That's great for several years.
Right.
But what's going to be done to accommodate those people who right now
After the
need to
5
park
years?
on the streets?
So for me, I look at, if you want to solve problems around homeless, around people living on the streets in cars, you take $1 trillion, $1 billion, and you start subsidizing some of these
From
market
where?
rate housing.
From
This
where?
is, we have philanthropists. We have a lot of money here. People just don't want to put money in the pot to solve
You
the
have
problem.
to get, so what's
tech com-
stopping
the
those,
tech companies need to
what's
chip in.
stopping those philanthropists right now?
Having a
Are any of them stepping up to the plate?
Well, I believe that the San Francisco Foundation, they received X amount of money to deal with homeless problems. People are trying to solve the problem, they just don't know what to do with their money. Well, we have some simple solutions. We have homes that are already built. We have apartments that are already built that are not filled because they're too expensive. So why not subsidize those units that are already built and fill them with people who are homeless?
It's a great idea, but is there any action? Are there any action steps being taken in that direction?
At this moment in time, no. And that's because the conversation needs to be had with people who have access to money.
So in the meantime, why the regulations to keep RV dwellers no parking on the streets?
In
What are
Menlo
they
Park,
supposed to do?
We've had this ordinance for, I don't know, 2 or 3 decades. It's always existed in Menlo Park.
It's time to change the ordinance, is it?
Well, that's something that we'd have to put in front of the council. And
But
as you can tell, on some topics with our council, they're very conservative.
Well, I mean, people have. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of concerns as well. It's, you know, I mean, there's a reason that you have permanent RV allocations. You know, have sanitation and security and all this kind of stuff, which you don't have on the streets and so forth. But on the point about financing for this kind of stuff, so yes, it's going to take money. We may be able to get it from philanthropists, but I think you're going to see. So Mountain View and also East Palo Alto passed business taxes in 2018 for housing and transportation projects. Okay, every city, okay, in the Silicon Valley was watching to see if those two initiatives passed, and they did.
Yes,
so
they
I
did.
think you're going to see a whole lot more of those coming in the valley in the next couple of years. There's going to be one in Palo Alto for sure, right, to pay for this kind of stuff, because it's going to, again, the region hasn't invested enough in its housing and transportation infrastructure in order to support its growth, and we got to balance that. Otherwise, I mean, it's not a question of they did something wrong and we have to go take it away. It's just a question of you got to balance your revenues and expenses, okay, if you're going to be sustainable in the long run. In the short run, we're going to do what we can. So the East Palo Alto program, I thought you were going to, which I thought you were going to talk about, is intended not to be a permanent RV park that you can go there and sort of just live there forever. I mean, they're coupling that with a lot of social services to try to move
That's
people.
true.
Try to move.
That's
It's
true.
intended to be a way
Temporary.
station transitional kind of thing to
So
move
did-
people into more secure housing than living on the street.
Will Palo Alto have something like that? I think right now, what RV dwellers are parking on El Camino.
Yeah, we reviewed a colleague's memo this past week to consider a program like that and send it to our Policy and Services Committee. So we're going to be considering it. Yeah,
Okay. Another question.
it's a regional issue. Everybody's going to have to do something.
A quick question from the audience.
Yes. My name's Pamela Jones. I live in Menlo Park. My family's been on the peninsula since 1928, so I know the area extremely well. I would like to know: is there any way that you can think of to incentivize building residential areas that helps people to understand that housing is not just about profit? That we're at a crisis now, and we have to look at this differently.
You know, the one, so I'm tempted to say, I mean, I'll cede it in a second here. I'm tempted to say the problem is that it's all about money. But in fact, one of the things that, I mean, as an example, right, and I think they're few and far between, but one of the things that all of our cities have done in response to Sacramento is we've all upzoned for ADUs, okay? I actually like ADUs. Some of the ADUs will go at market rate to tech workers. So the ADU that's next to my house, rented by a nice kid that works for Google, you know, it costs $3,500 a month or something like that. But some of them actually will go at below market rates to people's caregivers and their kids, you know, and their grandparents and so forth. So I like ADUs because it's more intervention from the local community, right, managing, as opposed to, well, the owner of my next door neighbor's ADU, which is a lady in Los Altos that owns property all over the valley and doesn't care about anything but rent. Right? Sorry, I just sucked up all your time. Go ahead.
A comment.
My comment is, I think we need to do more. I like the ideas of ADUs as well, and just thinking back to the question that we need to have broader discussions with our corporations. We need to have broader discussions with our philanthropists. We need to have broader discussions about what we can do now. People need housing now, not
You're
in 5
absolutely
years.
right. You're absolutely right. So it's good to know that there are some ideas in the works. We need to have broader discussions. So knowing what that need is, it'll be great to see when those steps will be taken to have those broader conversations. But at least we've started. You did say that there are things that are being done, and you seem to be optimistic in terms of it.
Every city in the Silicon Valley is doing stuff. Right?
Well, it's great
Some will
to
stick,
know
some
that every
won't.
city's doing stuff. Thank you so much for letting us know. I'd like to thank you for being here, and I'd like to thank our viewers for watching, and our audience. Until next time.
We didn't even talk about unfunded pension.